Okay. Are we good to get going? Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we'll now call to order the April 19th Capital Improvement Advisory Committee. We'll first do the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Draculich, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Draculich. Can we please do a roll call?
J.D. Draculich.
Here.
Harris Armstrong.
Here.
Peter Gower.
Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
Arthur Munoz.
Here.
Sylvia Villanueva is absent. Alex Felto.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. We'll now open public comment. This is general public comment for an item, either any action item or any general public comments. Do we have any requests to speak forms?
It should be noted for those in the audience that comments are to be addressed to the Planning Commission as a whole. Comments heard under this item will be limited to 3 minutes per person and may pertain to matters both on and off the Planning Commission agenda. Please note that the Planning Commission may not take action upon any matter not agendized for possible action on today's agenda. When you are called on for public comment, please state your name for the record and begin speaking. The timer will begin when you say your name, and you will be afforded 3 minutes. If you are an attendee in the Zoom meeting and would like to make public comment at this time, please raise your hand. Lastly, while in this room, please be respectful. Warnings will be issued by the presiding officer if there is disruptive behavior, and you will be asked to leave chambers if the behavior continues. With that, we did not receive any correspondence, no voicemails, and no request to speak forms were received for this item.
Great, thank you. Would anyone in the public like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment. Move on to agenda item number 4.1. Which is a staff report for possible recommendation to City Council on the police facility impact fee. Hi, Angela.
Good evening. Great. For the record, Angela Foos, Assistant Director with Development Services, here today to talk to you about the police impact fee. To give you a little bit of history for those of you who maybe weren't on the commission 3 years ago when this was adopted, go back about 4 or 5 years and we were looking at our city police headquarters. And it's an old building. It was built in the 1940s. And we were looking at what we can do to improve it to make it bigger and better. And the conclusion we came to is that it's old and the cost to repair it was going to be more than it was worth. So we came up with a new plan. The plan was to instead take our headquarters building on 2nd Street, as well as our evidence building, which is on a separate location off of Keystone, and our dispatch services, which is off of Parr and Spectrum, and to combine them all into one police safety center. And the idea was that we would take the old RGJ building and buy that and convert that into this new safety center. So then the idea was, well, how are we going to fund this new safety center. So we looked at what we have in our general fund in terms of cash. We looked at what we could bond. We looked at grant money, and we looked at the idea of an impact fee. So the city of Reno doesn't have a lot of impact fees. The one that you guys are probably familiar with is our regional road impact fee. That's something that this board reviews on a yearly basis as well. Impact fees are regulated by state law, and they basically allow jurisdictions to pay for certain types of things, such as police stations, fire stations, new parks, and infrastructure related to sewer and storm drain. Now, the key to impact fees is that it can only be paid for new growth. So in this example, we have an existing police station, right? We have a headquarters. So if we're going to replace that and build a new one, the square footage of that headquarters cannot be paid for with impact fees, only additional square footage. So in other words, new growth can be paid for with these impact fees. Existing development, even if you're replacing like for like, cannot be paid for with impact fees. So fast forward, maybe. There we go. In 2020, our city council adopted these new fees. And the way these work is if any time a development comes in for a building permit, whether it's a single family house or an industrial project or a new hospital, they pay these fees. And again, this is very similar to the regional road impact fees, where based on what your use is, the size of that use, you pay a fee. So these fees were adopted, and we've been collecting these fees for the last 3 years. The idea was that we're trying to raise up to $2.9 million, right? That's the cost of the new expanded portion of the public safety center. Not the existing square footage that we're replacing, but the additional square footage. So at some point, when we've paid off that $2.9 million, these fees will go away. They will sunset. This isn't something we're going to keep forever. It's just to pay for this one public safety center, not other future uses. So every 3 years, by state law, we're required to come back and review these and see if we need to raise those fees, to lower those fees, or to change any of our assumptions. So these have been in place again for 3 years. So this is really our first 3-year look at, were those assumptions correct, right? Did we make those fees that we came up with, were those accurate? Should we have actually charged more to collect more money, or are we at a good price? So here's what has changed that we're aware of since 3 years ago. One is the cost of construction. Take yourself back to 3 years. What was going on? COVID. And how did COVID change the cost of construction, right? It made things astronomically more expensive in certain areas. So one is the fees that we were assuming to the cost to build the public safety center was quite a bit off from 3 years ago to where we're at today. The second thing is just some changes to the design. So at one point early on in this process, we were going to combine all 3 of those different buildings. We had dispatch, we had the headquarters, and we had evidence. And what we decided is we're going to keep dispatch where it's at, off of Par and Spectrum. So we're only talking about those other 2 elements, the headquarters piece and the evidence piece. So that changed in the design. We also made some additions to the project. You know, once we actually got in there with our architect, we did a full design of what we need, then that made some changes and then the costs went up. From a sustainability perspective, we also added some solar panels, and that was about a $5 million increase in price. So long term, that's going to be a good investment. Short term, that's expensive. So here's a chart that kind of shows you where we were 3 years ago, what our assumptions were, how much money we thought we needed to raise compared to now. So again, 3 years ago, we thought we needed about $2.9 million through these impact fees. What we actually need now is closer to $13 million through these impact fees. And again, that kind of breaks down in terms of the square footage of this building, right? So we can only use the impact fees to pay for the additional square footage. So we'd have these 3 different kind of line charts. One is what's there today, the existing one on the left. So that's the 3 categories, the dispatch, the evidence, and the headquarters. Then that middle one, the planned area, was back in 2020, that planned area that we thought we needed for square footage. Fast forward 3 years, now we're looking at the columns on the right. So we took out dispatch, and so we have evidence and headquarters. So our square footage slightly changed from what we initially thought 3 years ago. And then the cost of the Public Safety Center. Again, 3 years ago, we thought it was going to be around $33 million. Now it's closer to $71 million. Not all of that is the cost of construction. There were other elements that we picked up along the way that we had not anticipated when we first came up with these fees. So the cost of the building itself is closer to, I think, about $55 million. So not that whole $71 million is not just the building. Again, there's many elements that go into this that affected the price and the increase. So where are we now in terms of how much money have we raised? We're averaging about $500,000 a year in impact fees. When we were 3 years ago, we were estimating closer to about $235,000 a year in impact fees. So the good news is that while the cost went up significantly, we raised quite a bit more money than we anticipated. And this has been consistent for the last 3 years. But looking forward, right, do we think that this is going to continue? Will these development trends continue? So if development were to slow down, if the type of development were to slow down, how will that impact how much money we raise? Here's just some of the things we looked at as we were doing this analysis. So this is a box here that shows within the last 3 years, how many both single-family and multifamily units have been constructed? 2020, on average. 2021, our multifamily units shot up significantly. And again, what was going on? COVID. Back in 2022, they went back down to a little bit of a normal range. And then for the last 3 months, you can see where we're at. In terms of our assumptions 3 years ago to where we're at today, this is a chart that shows you what we thought we were going to see in terms of building permits. So if you take all the building permits that come in, let's say there's 10,000 a year building permits that come in for review, we thought we'll probably have about 53% of those being residential. We're actually about 60% residential. So more residential came in than we anticipated. In terms of commercial and office, that was less than we anticipated. Again, COVID. During COVID, there wasn't a whole lot of commercial or a whole lot of office building being built. Industrial shot up about 13%, which is, again, much higher than we anticipated, but everybody was at home shopping online, so the need for more logistics, warehousing, and distribution shot up. So the challenges we have now is, how do we forecast going forward? Are we going to have these same numbers? The things that we don't know, again, is the market changes, right? So we're getting about $500,000 a year in these impact fees, which is great. If we continue on that trend, we'll be able to raise that $12.9 million within the next 20 years. If trends slow down, then that money's not going to come in as fast. So the question is, should we raise fees or lower fees and keep them the same? At this point, because we've had such an odd 3 years in terms of development, in terms of rising costs, our proposal to the commission here is not to raise fees, just to keep them status quo. What we would like to do then is make some updates to the capital improvement plan. That's that separate document that was in the staff report. It's about 14 pages. So we updated the information that we do know in terms of the cost of this building, in terms of the square footage of the evidence and the dispatch areas within this building. So we updated all of those charts, and then we're proposing again to not change fees, but then come back within the next 3 years and give you guys another update on where we're at. So if we need to raise the fees, we'll keep an eye on that. And at the end of the day, the money raised through this impact fee goes to pay off the debt. And so we have a 30-year bond on that debt. So if we can raise this money, this impact fee, the $12.9 million, within the next 30 years, we can pay off that debt. So once that money is raised, we have to stop the fees. If we raise it in 15 years, great. We quit charging the fees, it goes away completely. If it takes us longer to raise those fees, 20 years, 25 years, that's still okay, because we don't have to have that paid off until the bond is paid off in 30 years. So before you is a recommendation, and again, this is a recommendation from the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee to the City Council, who ultimately has the final say in raising the fees or not. So joining me is our urban economist, Jordan Hosmer-Henner. He and I worked on this police impact fee. We were both fairly new to this process, as the individuals working on this 3 years ago are no longer at the city, so it was a learning process all around. And with that, we are available for questions.
Great, thank you so much. We'll come back to the commission for disclosures. I'll start with myself. I represent the Reno Police Protective Association. And because this deals with something that could benefit the police, I'm going to abstain from the vote and discussion on this and turn it over to Commissioner Draculich to take the lead as far as the rest of the disclosures and the rest of this item. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Commissioner Gower, if you want to give us your disclosures.
Thank you. No disclosures.
Commissioner Motion, on disclosures, I was a California police officer for 8 years, ending in 2013.
Harris Armstrong, no disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures. Commissioner Draculich, no disclosures. All right. Sorry, team, just catching up. So it looks like, will we be taking public comment for this item? Do we have any request to speak forms?
We did not receive any request to speak forms, no voicemails, and no correspondence was received.
Okay, thank you. Anybody in the room tonight wish to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment and move to discussion or questions of the city.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Angela, question. And I appreciate the fact that, moving forward on this, the recommendation is not to increase fees despite some of the things that are going on. I guess one question.
Is your mic on?
It's blinking off and on, so
There.
did you just turn me on?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll talk louder. So for that overall fee, that's just the construction. That's not the land acquisition cost or the building acquisition cost included in that 71 million?
It is. That is the total cost. So the land was about 9 million. The cost of the building is about 55 million. The cost of the solar kind of infrastructure that we talked about is another 5 million. And then there's a number of what we call them kind of permitting, inspections, furnishings, that type of thing is another about 3 million.
Okay. And so then just to understand that, I guess, a step further, in terms of the 12.9 that you're looking at, is that just a straight, here's the overall cost of the project divided by the square footage to get a square footage amount, and then apply that to the added square footage required of the replacement? So there's not a looking at this from a perspective of, there was land acquisition costs, there was, the solar panels, all of these things that may not have a direct impact on the specific added square footage that you're looking at. It's just a straight divide the building square footage by the overall cost, and then that resulting number is what we're applying these funds to.
Kind of. So essentially, we looked at the additional square footage from what's there in place today versus what's proposed. It's about an 18% increase in the square footage. So we took 18% of the cost of that 71 million and came up with that 12.9 million, which can be applied through impact fees.
Okay. So, and then the remaining cost, as I think you touched on at the very beginning, that's going to be paid for through various other funding mechanisms. So the whole purpose of this is to tie to that added square footage.
Correct. And so the other kind of funding mechanisms, we bonded for a percentage of this. We had cash. We had about $35 million in cash that was used for this. And then we had a grant of about $5 million. So between those four really different funding sources, that's how this is being paid for. And so those impact fees are supposed to only go towards the new growth, right? New growth is supposed to be kind of the reason for this, the demand for this, as we need more space, as we have more people, we have more calls for service for our police services, those impact fees can only pay for the new growth portion.
Okay, and my biggest thing was just trying to understand how the new growth portion was being applied, because it seemed, that the cost per square foot on a renovation that is up there is significantly higher than what it should be costing. So I was trying to understand how this was applied, and as long as now that I understand the math, I'm recognizing where we're going. So thank you for that.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Angela, can you just clarify the nexus between the benefit of the facility expansion and what that means in terms of the capacity and the potential efficiency of the City of Reno Police to serve new growth?
I think that's a great question. So some of the challenges we have with our existing facilities, we have, again, an evidence building. It's an old building off of Keystone, running out of square footage where we can store things. The headquarters building itself, we have a lot of people crammed in there with not any room to grow. So by having this additional square footage, we have the ability to add in more services, all the things that we can't do unless we build another separate building to actually house more of those services. Now we have the ability to do that. And as the community grows, it's not just residential. As we have more industrial development, as we have more commercial development, they too call 911 and somebody has to respond. So from the perspective of this region really is growing, and how are we trying to keep up with police and fire and sewer and all those things? This is one area that I think we as a city need to really focus on right now, because again, that building that's there now, the headquarters, it was built in the 40s, and so it is very much past its prime, and so this will give us the ability to do more with that more square footage, bring in technology, the things that we can't do with an old antiquated building.
Thank you. And I guess, if I could, Mr. Chair, another question. So you mentioned the solar panels a couple times. I'm sure the city ran a cost benefit, so there's an upfront cost of that infrastructure, but over time, the gains realized from that energy generation infrastructure is leading to a net gain, or, because you mentioned that as one might wonder if the impact fee is, ongoing, that it's going to pay for solar panels instead of police facilities. It seems like the way you phrased it, and services. But I'm assuming that choice was to provide a long-term cost savings to the city over time. Is that right?
It is, and I don't have the breakdown of that number. I think it's kind of a bigger sustainability thing it's a component of our sustainability practice that we're trying to be better. And in this case, we didn't plan for it when we first came up with this project. And so when it came to our attention that we have the ability to recoup some of that energy, through that $5 million investment, it really is something that we felt was aligned with our master plan and where we're trying to go as a city. And those impact fees can go to pay for things, like buildings and utilities. So all of that is allowed to be paid for through those impact fees.
Okay, thank you.
Quick follow-up on the solar panels. So is that $5 million cost locked in, or do you expect it to vary? I mean, how far along are you in the process of actually procuring those panels? Do you assume buffer for the cost to potentially go up given certain supply chain constraints, or is that number, fairly locked in?
So I don't know the specifics of when we're ordering. When we did, this went out to bid back in 2021. And so we had the general contractor put a bid on this, and he had a $1 million contingency fund. So as prices go up or down, we do have that $1 million kind of wiggle room if design changes or things come up that change. Keep in mind too, so the building is under construction now. We anticipate, I believe, in 2027 that we'll be up and operating. And as things change again, we will come back before this board. If something drastic changes and we say, turns out There was a cost that we did not anticipate. Maybe there was something structurally with the building that we didn't catch. We have the ability to come back and say we need to make some more changes to these impact fees. But again, at this point, this is kind of our comfort level to say that we don't want to raise fees, knowing that we have 30 years to pay this off. So given that we're still kind of in an influx of not really knowing the ultimately full cost of that building until it's constructed, this gives us another couple years to wait for that information and see if we need to make changes.
Okay, great, thank you. And just one more follow-up, if I may. Does the cost of debt actually impact your your fee assumptions? Like if interest rates go up or you don't lock your bond in, is that another discussion that kind of prompts the impact fee, or is it more or less completely separate from your cost of debt?
So we are locked in right now with that bond, and so the number that kind of magic number that we're locked in with is that $71 million.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Munoz. I'm struggling to wrap my head around. You had made a statement that we were about $3 million when this was set during COVID, and prices were a lot higher then. But then we come back 3 years later, and now we're $10 million more than that. How could we be so far off? That seems we more than doubled. How is that possible?
Yeah, so these numbers were put together in late 2019, early 2020. We, at that time, anticipated the cost of this project to be about $33 million. We weren't at a final design. We didn't have everything figured out back then. So we created these impact fees, knowing that, again, it's kind of a fluid thing where we know the numbers could change and we have to come back and review them on a regular basis. So at that time, that early stage in the process, $33 million was the number that we were working from. Then over the course of the next 2 years, we had our architect go to final design. We made some significant design changes as well by not putting in the dispatch piece, right? That gave us a lot more flexibility to move the square footages around and say, ooh, what are our needs moving forward? So a lot of that changed just what the city's needs were. And then we added additional square footage on top of what we had originally anticipated. So those pieces were in addition to the construction costs going up. And when we looked at, when we locked in that bid with that builder, that was in 2021. So that was kind of in the middle of COVID, I would say, where we were still having issues getting materials, whether timber was up that day or down that day, things were in flux. But in talking to a lot of the construction field as a whole, this is universal, right? This is not unique to Reno or this area. Construction costs were significantly higher during COVID when we locked in that price with the builder.
Okay, I understand that, yet we locked in a price with the builder. We removed a large component, expensive component for dispatch from that, yet we still went up from 31 million to 77 million?
So correct. And again, the 33 million was what we'd initially
33.
anticipated. Where we're at today is 71.
Okay. Is there, and I know it's set at 3 years, is there any trigger or something else that could happen in the future where if it more than doubles that impact fee, this comes before us and city council before the 3 years, and so it's not such a gigantic shock of here's $10 more million that we weren't expecting?
Yeah, it's at a minimum every 3 years we need to come back. So we will continue to watch this, and if anything major changes, definitely, I think, knowing what we know now, we feel pretty good going forward. Again, we've locked in that 71 million. We have the bond for it. We have all of that piece figured out. If things change drastically, even with the market, right? If the market tanks and we don't have development, we don't have impact fees coming in, we can bring this back to this commission and have another discussion if it still makes sense to keep these fees where they're at.
Again, before the 3 years or only at the 3 years?
We could do it more than.
We can do it more than?
We can do it earlier.
Okay, and is there a specific trigger that sets that off?
There's not.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dracula, Commissioner Munoz kind of asked my same question. I guess what's jumped off the board at me is when you're telling me we're stockpiling these impact fees, and then you said that, the years of 20 years from now, it just looks like there's so much that can change in between that time, good or bad. And I guess I just want to make sure we have a watchful eye on that, or we're not, a project that's actually going to be built 40 years from now when it's needed. So you asked my question. I think I understand the answer, but those are my concerns.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Commissioner Johnson. Angela, just to follow up on this. So you've got the contractor on board, the contractor's working. Not to get into the specifics of the agreement, but essentially the cost that you have from the contractor is their agreement with the city.
Correct.
So as long as the process, and I'm not sure about the 2027 date, I'm assuming that involves relocation and furniture acquisition and everything else. The construction should be done prior to that. But this isn't a situation where the $71 million number that we have now, that's the contract with the city.
Correct.
So there's not, short of the city deciding to do something different and change the design, the price is locked in where it is. And to your point, and again, I don't know what the agreement is, but if it was done as a sort of an estimate prior to everything being finalized, I suspect that there is, as you say, there's that contingency in there. So the ultimate number should not exceed that 71 million. If anything, it would go down based on contingency potentially not being needed.
Correct. And so as an example, let's just say hypothetically, we decided to move dispatch to this location, right? So that would involve some changes that would impact this whole project. Those are the types of things that I would envision that would impact this police impact fee. It would be great if costs went down and something drastically changed, but that 71 million is where we're locked in at this point, unless something unanticipated comes up or some design change, again, as brought forth by the city, changes and the needs of this facility change.
Okay, and I guess then to follow, so that isn't quite the answer that I was hoping to hear, because what that tells me is that perhaps there is an idea that this fee will continue to be collected after this project is done with the anticipation of potential future changes.
Nope, let me backtrack that.
Okay.
That is not what I meant.
Right. Okay. So as I understand it, and just to go back to my initial point, there is a $71 million agreement between the city and the contractor for the work on this facility. That is what, and the piece of that this is being asked to fund is the $12 million.
Correct. The cost to build this building, total, that's the land, that's the furnishings inside, is 71 million.
Right.
We have a contract with a general contractor for about 54 million. So that's what we know today. That's the information we all have in front of us today that we have to make our decisions based on. If something changes down the road, whatever that change is, we will bring it back and discuss it again and talk about why we would need to change those fees. So what we know today is we are good. We are raising money. We're raising more money than we anticipated. We have 30 years to raise that $12.9 million. We feel really comfortable that we don't need to raise the fees. We can keep earning the fees that we have today, and we'll have that debt paid off within the next 30 years.
Okay. So and I guess that answers the second part of this, is that those impact fees are being collected in this 30 years to pay off $12 million as indicated today.
Correct.
And so any increase beyond that, that's a further discussion. So, but the intent is we are not in the same situation we were 3 years ago, where this is a guesstimate as to what this is going to be.
Correct.
This is a defined project with a permit, with an agreement, and short of something changing, it's no longer subject to the whims of, prices going up and down because there's a contract that's locked in. It's not subject to, more major design changes because those are a part of what we're doing. So, because I share Commissioner Munoz's point about, that's a huge sticker shock to be looking at. But if I'm understanding correctly in the way I'm looking at this is a defined parameter at this point. This isn't, hey, we've got 4 more things out there that we're still planning for that this is going towards. This is a specific thing based on a specific contract and design that we currently have.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that long-winded, but thank you, Commissioner.
Great. No, thank you for the question and discussion. Any more questions?
Yeah, one more
Please,
question.
go ahead.
Angela, so hypothetically, again, the buildings were set at the 12.9, and in the next 2 years, they decide they want to put a dispatch center in there for another 20,000 feet. So you can come back in 3 years and say, hey, now we're up to 20 million because we added additional square footage, and we need to clear it again to make sure that we need to raise fees or whatever we need to do with fees at this time, depending on what the market does, to cover this extra. Now, when this began 3 years ago, what was the initial? Was the 2.3 million was what was supposed to be raised, or what the impact fee was going to be initially?
Correct. Our initial assumption was overall we need to have $33 million total raised, right, with bonds and cash and grants. And so of that, the component that we could use through impact fees was about 2.9 million.
Okay, so I think where I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this, and maybe this is going to be more for discussion, is it almost feels like we're approving a blank check here. And if whoever's just designing this decides to expand again, then this impact fee that was supposed to be, which 2.3, and they've already raised 500 each year, would have been done in 6 years, approximately 6 to 7 years. Now we're extending this out to 30 years that we're going to charge this impact fee. I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around this.
And maybe I should just highlight too, so city council makes the policy decision to build a public safety center. They make the policy decision to implement an impact fee and to bond for this and to pay cash. So that is their purview. They made the decision to adopt an impact fee, and they said, give us an idea of how much we think we need to raise based on a cost of 33 million. So 3 years ago, that is what was adopted. Since then, the fees have gone up. Council has adopted that $71 million price tag. That is something they have adopted. They did that through a bond. They did that through paying cash through their general fund. And they did that through, again, accepting this builder with a price tag of $55 million to build this building. So all of that decision was made by City Council.
Okay, thank you.
If no more questions, we can switch into discussion. Or a motion.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, just as a discussion item on here, and I appreciate where the questions are coming. I think I would have heartburn recommending this move forward if the fees were being increased. I think there's, from the industry, I find the increase in costs a little bit excessive, but again, that's not our purview. And I think what the city is saying is that there is a plan to move forward to pay this off with the existing fee structure that's in place. That may last longer than anticipated, but we're not being asked to increase that as a result of this. I share Commissioner Munoz's sentiments that this seems to be going on longer than it necessarily would, but that's not actually what we're looking at and being asked to look at tonight. What we're being asked to look at tonight is a recommendation to keep the fees where they are for the next period of time until this comes back to us. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm not as comfortable with where that, how it got to this point, but I'm certainly comfortable with that point being existing and that we're moving forward under that scenario based on the way that it's being presented to us this evening. So there's other issues around there with some costs. There's other issues around there with how the costs are being allocated. But in the grand picture, we're being asked to recommend the fee structure stay the same and be applied to this project. So that's the way I'm looking at it, and that's how I'm how I'm having to review it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Munoz, I'm gonna mirror that. And for me, this does feel like like we are raising the fees because we are extending it out so much longer than it was initially going to be done. That not being what we're looking at tonight, I don't see any other way than to pass this. If fees were being raised, I think this would be a lot harder vote. And I believe I really appreciate Ms. Foos's explaining the way the city has already adopted this and moved forward. The only thing we are doing is voting on whether we should recommend the fees be kept the same. So I'm right with you.
Mr. Chair, if there's no other discussion, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please do.
Okay. I move that the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council of the Police Facility Impact Fee Capital Improvement Plan, and the fee schedule is outlined in the staff report.
All right, we have a motion.
Commissioner Johnson, I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Good luck. Thanks, Angela. All right, we will close item 4 and move to item number 5, public comment, general public comment for this meeting. Michelle, any public comment?
I did not receive any public comment, no voicemails, and no correspondence was received.
Anybody in the chambers wish to speak about this meeting in general public comment? Seeing none, we will close item 5, number public comment, and move to item number 6, adjournment.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. We adjourn. 5-minute break, or do we want to bring chair back in? And
No, we need to take a break for about
Okay.
15 minutes in between.
okay, we'll take a 10-minute break, come back at 6:25. Thank you.